Idaho.
Would you see a difference in, say, experience and perhaps attitudes towards people of color?
Yeah, I don't know, because Idaho has such a small African American population. I just don't know. And I don't know, growing up in Virginia, a lot of people would not have let me hang around with Colonel Gregg or had an African American Cub Scout leader or stuff. So I don't know how my dad developed, his racial beliefs versus those of Virginians. It was always expressed to me that was, just a very negative thing, and very happy that.
And you think his parents embraced the?
I don't know. I don't think they so much embraced as they didn't really express an intolerance. The only exception I can, looking back on it now, can think is that my grandmother was Ona Cummings, was the daughter of Charles Cummings. She married Jesse Mosher. And Jesse Mosher was the oldest of 10 children. He was born in Iowa, but they went to Idaho in 1905, settled back in the wilderness. And they didn't take the best farming land in the homestead. And when I asked later why, they said he liked to hunt and fish more than farming, so he took the land was closer to the hunting and fishing than good farmland. But a lot of times their land was butted up right against the Nez Perce Indian Range. And Grandpa has talked about going to school with the Nez Perce girls, a Nez Perce girl that he used to ride the horse to school with and everything. And as they'd ride to school, she'd teach him the Indian language and she'd speak English to him. He'd teach English. And he does, in one of his stories, he retorts where the teacher was upset with the Indian girl because she wouldn't speak English in class and was ready to punish her for not speaking English in class. And his mother stepped forward and said, if you do that, she will not come to school at all. And Jess got her to speak English in class more by teaching her English on horseback as they rode to school in the morning. And Grandpa did not have a lot of education, so they were out in the wilderness so far that I don't think Grandpa had what you would call a full education.
And your father would attend law school in Idaho?
Yeah. Dad actually was able to graduate early from high school, and he started taking classes at the University of Idaho while he still would have been a student at Lewiston High School. This was 1945. When he went back and graduated properly with his class, he then entered the Navy for 2 years. While he was in the Navy, he developed rheumatic fever, and so he was discharged from the Navy because of his rheumatic fever. And he had attended officers candidate class out in Bainbridge, Maryland. And at the time, he had dated a woman there. He wanted to marry that woman actually originally, but she was not going to Idaho. She grew up in Washington, D.C., and she was not leaving Washington. As fate would have it, people knew when Dad divorced that she was also divorced and got the two together, and they did eventually marry, and they've now been married longer than my parents were. So, but after his naval service, he went back and attended the University of Idaho and became a lawyer. And I really cannot think of many other people in the family that are lawyers. He didn't have anybody that was a role model in the family that would have pointed him towards law school.
So there seems to be a spirit of tolerance.
Yes. And I think that might have been developed with the Indians first more than with the African American. After I had published the book and everything, my dad said that I'd sent the books, of course, to my dad's siblings. And he says that one of his sisters says, Mother knew, and we weren't supposed to talk about it. So, I'm finding out after the fact that some people did know about the family secret. It just was never talked about until I met people at the 2000 reunion, and they encouraged me to look into it.
And the secret had much to do with, I'm asking, had to do with prevailing attitudes at a particular time. Should someone know the things that happened to Margaret in elementary school may be something that could have, not that it would have, happened to, the fear may have been they would become targets of that kind of.
Yeah, and I'm sure that that was something that happened in Michigan. I really did not know my Michigan family until 2000, and yet they've embraced me, and they've opened up their homes to me, and they have encouraged me in every aspect of it. So, but I get the sense from them that there probably was some intolerance. And I go back and I look in the records. They talk about the first white settlers in Fork Township coming in 1874. Abraham. Sure.
Can you give me what you?
My medicine does make me sweat a little bit. I actually am very comfortable.
Okay.
So. Do you know where we were?
Because I'm not ready. Can I get, oh.
Here, I'm not using this one.
Have we gone back to Idaho, father's attorney, Michigan, horseback to school? I mean, we're not rolling now, right?
Yeah, we are. I can pause it if you
Give me,
want.
we touched on this a little bit earlier, but maybe we can talk a little bit more about it or talk more extensively about the Underground Railroad.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know of, you know the house? Or
I know the basic route. The more people that I've interviewed and visited, and since I've been out on disability, I've taken several trips across country. And I go do research, and then I stop in and I'll visit with cousins that I've been writing to. In my research, if I think I've found somebody, I'll send out what I call a cold letter, which says I think we're related, and this is how I think we're related, and I'd be interested in hearing from you. And I want to give them enough information that they know that they're related to me, so that I'm not some generic genealogy farm company farming out, generic genealogy stuff. Enough that they know that we actually are related, but not so much that if they aren't the person I'm looking for, that I've given them too much personal information. So, but 98% of the time I get good responses from these letters. And as I've gone across country, I've met with quite a few people, and everybody seems to add a little bit to the story. And with the Underground Railroad parts, a lot of what I've heard are confirmation of things that happened along them, and other things are related to the way life was done. They were an Ohio River community. It is most likely that they, at times, would build a raft by the river during the winter and load up their crops, and in the spring would put the planting in, and as the water rose on the Ohio, they would float the raft down to New Orleans, sell their crops, sell the lumber from the raft, and then find their way back just in time to harvest the next crop. And so I've heard confirmation of these stories that are the actual history from Ohio. I had mentioned that the genealogy had been done in the 70s by a Bernita Cummings, just basically a basic family tree that was printed out on an early computer, and I'd started with that. I found some discrepancies in some of the things she had said, such as she put the relatives as from Cincinnati, Ohio. And when you live in Spokane, Cincinnati is pretty close to Brown County, Ohio. So I talked to her and I said, where did you get your information from? Is it fact or hearsay? She said, oh, it's just what Mother told us. So when I found discrepancies, I would correct them, but at the same time, if, say, a name didn't fit where she had it, I'd eventually find it somewhere else in the family. And as I did this, I ran into people that talked about the Ohio families and about how they were involved with the Underground Railroad. And I knew that the Quakers were involved with the Underground Railroad, and I had always wondered how the two sides of the family had gotten together, because they were right next to each other in Ohio, yet they don't seem to have gotten together until Indiana and Missouri. And when I finally traced down the connection to one, Ezekiel T. Reed, who was Mattie Bell Reed's father. She was the one who married Charles Cummings. Ezekiel's first wife passed away, and I always wondered how he met his second wife. Well, I found out that Elvira, who was Mattie's mother, had an aunt who lived actually right between Ezekiel's house and his first wife's house. And so I think in the process of the death and the funeral and stuff, just happened to be a place along the road between the two, and she would have been visiting an aunt out there. It was that family of William and Margaret Myers who I believe were the ones that were active in the Underground Railroad. His family has a long oral history that they were involved. His son, David Myers, became a very prominent citizen in Pontiac, Illinois. And they are very proud of the story that at one time Booker T. Washington came out to Pontiac to speak. And when it got time for him to go, he could not get a ride to the train station. Nobody would give him a ride because he was an African American. And they state that they were proud that John got up and took the carriage into the train station himself and says, if nobody else will, I'm going to do it. This is a prominent man. He came to speak to us and he deserves the proper respect. And so they've got a very strong oral history of that. Going back and doing research on his family and others, I find just so many coincidences, nothing that actually points to the actual documentation, but there's just so much, and they were related to groups that were active, known to be active in the Underground Railroad in Brown County, that I would like to believe that it's true. So.
Will you know any of those names, any of those groups offhand?
Well, I believe the Presbyterian Church in Russellville, which they belonged to, was probably the center point for that. I know that, I have heard that there were stops in Russellville from Ripley going up to Highland County. I've always been kind of curious. A lot of this family moved out to near Indianapolis, and I've always wondered if none of the routes point from Brown County through Indianapolis, but I've always wondered if there wasn't a route that somehow went through there that wasn't talked about much. Some of the other older members of the family have also talked about, where I'm talking about some coincidences, about all the older women she remembers when she was a little kid would sit around and make quilts. And she always thought it was kind of funny. They'd be talking their heads off, but whenever a young kid would come in the room, they'd get quiet. And while this wasn't at the time of the Underground Railroad, I think it probably, like a lasting legacy from the Underground Railroad, they would have been doing quilts. And the children would not have been trusted to keep the secrets, and they would have gotten quiet when the children were in the room. So again, it's just an inference, but something that sounded very, she could not understand why all the women would get quiet whenever the kids would come in the room. And I said, well, it kind of would make sense because they would have been the children that were the descendants, actual children of the ones that were active in the Underground Railroad. William, the connection in the Wright family there is that